On September the 11th, when the Twin Towers collapsed, 2 police officers were trapped, buried alive beneath the rubble.
We were crushed, I was burnt, shot at. I was really just ready to give up.
What happened next became the stuff of legend. There was talk of a mysterious soldier who appeared out of nowhere.
He jumped in his car, he assembled his uniform, and he tore out of there like the world was on fire and he had to go put it out.
He conducted the most incredible rescue mission of 9/11 and then vanished without a trace.
Not looking for any notoriety. He just went off into the night afterwards and went about his business.
Hollywood even made a movie about what he'd done, but without knowing who he was. The full story has never been told. Until now. This is a photograph of Jason Thomas, taken on 9/11. It's just one of the many pieces of evidence that helped tell his remarkable story, which for years he kept secret.
Jason didn't tell anyone in the family, as close as we are, what happened that day, what he'd done, any of it. And I believe he didn't, because that's what heroes are made out of. You would just think he was a regular kind of quiet kind of man. You would not know all of that fire and all of that essence, all of that humanity was within him.
In 2001, father of 5, Jason lived on Long Island with his wife and children.
We met in Ohio, and I was this little Ohio country girl, and here's this New York City guy, and he just really came across as cocky and arrogant. But he chased me and courted me, I guess, for a little while, and he wore on me. I could tell he was a really good guy. He had a big heart, even though he didn't really like to show it. But what I really liked about him is he was always rooting for the underdog. Like, he wasn't just rooting for the underdog, he would fight for the underdog.
On 9/11, he was taking his baby daughter to his mother's house before heading to law school.
The morning of 9/11, what a day, what a morning. I remember looking out the window. It was such a beautiful day out. Shit. As I pulled up to my mother's house, I remember seeing this eerie look on my mother's face. And when I got out my car and went up to the door, my mother said a plane just flew into one of the buildings. And I said, "Mom, what are you talking about?" She said a plane had just flew into one of the World Trade Centers. And at that point in time, I knew that we were attacked by terrorists.
Jason had previously been a sergeant in the U.S. Marine Corps.
There's a Marine Corps motto, Semper Fidelis, and that means always faithful. And what that truly means is you're faithful to the flag, you're faithful to your countrymen. If you ever see anyone in need, you better do something to assist and help them. And a light bulb clicked, like your uniform's in the trunk of your car. And I remember just running to the trunk of my car, grabbing my uniform out and throwing it on.
And he gives my mother the baby, and she said, "Where are you going? Where are you?" This is her son, and this is one of the younger children. "Where are you going?" And he said, "Mom, I gotta go do this."
I remember turning on a radio station,
now, if you look at the second building,
hearing that a second plane had impacted the other trade center. And then it just was like, we're under attack.
Meanwhile, police officer Will Jimeno had just arrived at the towers.
And I remember just standing there trying to figure out what's going on. And that's when one of the senior officers said, look, they're jumping. And we looked up toward Tower 1, which was to our right, and I could see the big gaping hole. And all of a sudden, you just saw people start jumping. And it was a horrific, horrific sight. As a police officer, you know, we take an oath to protect and serve, and you felt this big. You felt just helpless, like you were standing in front of the ocean. There was nothing you can do. You just wanted to get up there and really help people.
Will took action and joined a small team of police officers on a rescue mission in the buildings. They were led by Sergeant John McLaughlin, seen here in the basement of the towers that morning.
And one thing we told each other is, no matter what happens, we're going to stay together. Don't leave each other. So that was right off the bat in my mind as well as theirs. And at that point, Sergeant McLaughlin said, let's go. And I remember Sergeant McLaughlin said, we're going to go toward Tower 2.
They were in the basement of the Trade Center, making their way towards the South Tower.
That's when I saw like the biggest fireball I've ever seen in my life. And everything started shaking. I looked up, everything was shaking like out of a movie. I grabbed my helmet and I really didn't know what to do. That's when Sergeant McLaughlin yelled, run toward the elevator. Just felt like I just got picked up and just slammed. Debris started hitting me. We're all yelling, don't know what's going on. At one point, a big piece of concrete hits my helmet and just rips it off, chin strap and everything, just ripped it off my head. All I could do was cover myself as the debris coming down. You know, it seemed like to last forever, but it happened really quick, and then everything just stopped. There was a hole above me about 30 feet up, and light was coming in. When the dust settled, I could see a little bit, and all I saw was a big piece of concrete laying on me. It covered my whole left side, leaving my left arm out and more usages of my right arm. As the building came down, which we didn't know, a wall actually fell on me, and I only had about this much before the rubble above my face, literally about this much. And that's when my pain started to set in. On my whole left side of my body, which actually now was being crushed by the concrete that fell on me.
Along with Will, only Sergeant John McLaughlin and this man, Officer Dominic Pizzulo, had survived the collapse. John was buried deeper into the void, but Dominic was free and their best hope of escape.
He looked up and he said to Sergeant McLaughlin, I can get out this hole. And Sergeant McLaughlin said, don't leave, because if you leave us, you'll never find us.
Now Dominic had a difficult choice: to stay with his colleagues or go in search of help.
And I got to tell you, it was a little tense there, because I think people can really, if you put yourself in his position, you have an opportunity to go out and get more help. But instead, Dominic did the tough choice, and he stayed. And for the next probably 20 minutes, he tried to get me out. And at the end of 20 minutes or so, he just said, Willie, I can't get you out.
When I arrived into Manhattan, the only building that was standing was the North Tower. And that was so devastating. I knew at that point in time that the city was going to need as much assistance as possible. And at that time, I was so glad that I had made the right decision to respond as quickly as I possibly could.
Jason parked his car close to where this footage was taken.
I remember hearing this awful sound. It just sounded like just pure destruction. And I looked up and it was the North Tower coming down. I kneeled beside my car and prayed that I would be okay.
You know, I don't know what's coming, but it sounded like a big, just like the biggest freight train in your life coming right at you. I got more concrete on me, so I started yelling more. Sergeant McLaughlin, at this point, I could hear him yelling. And then I looked over, and that was tough because at this point, I looked over and my friend, my classmate, you know, Dominic was mortally injured. A piece of concrete had come in and just sat him down. And he was bleeding out his mouth, and it was a very, very tough situation. And Dominic said, I'm dying, Willie. Don't let anybody forget that I died trying to save you guys. I said, Dom, I would never let anybody forget that. And he cracked a joke, believe it or not. He said to Sergeant McLaughlin, you know, can I get a 3-8, which is our code for a break? And Sergeant McLaughlin, even through his pain, said, yeah, take a 3-8. And I remember at that point, he's just struggling. And he actually pulled out his sidearm. And he said, Willie, don't forget, I died trying to save you guys. And at this point, he points his gun, his handgun, out to the hole above us. In a last-ditch effort for someone to hear us, he fires his weapon, and he just slumps over. And, you know, that's when I realized Dom's gone. I start yelling, Dom's gone, Sarge, Dom's gone. And Sergeant McLaughlin, through his pain, just says, keep focused, keep focused.
John and Will were on their own. Jason Thomas was running towards the scene. Incredibly, this is him, caught on camera. The lost hero of 9/11 was on his way. But what would make someone run towards danger when everyone else is fleeing in the opposite direction?
I think he's very unique in the way that he immediately reacts to certain situations. He thinks outside of himself, which most people wouldn't do just inherently out of human nature. We think of ourselves first, and we'll try to see how we can help someone else while keeping ourselves safe, but he doesn't think like that.
Jason was brought up in one of the largest families in New York. One of 18 children, he was the son of a preacher.
For my parents, it was very important as they raised children to not just raise children, but raise children that cared.
My mother and father would always tell me, never leave your brother behind. You are your brother's keeper. So on September 11th, I felt responsible. This is my city. This is where I grew up at. This is my home. It was my duty to do something. I felt compelled to assist in any way that I could.
The collapse of the North Tower had killed police officer Dominic Pizzulo. Now, 2 of his colleagues were trapped, 30 feet underground.
I'm trying to eat this pain that I have. I'm trying to get myself out, and that's when these fireballs start falling in. I look over toward Dominic, and this debris, I call them fireballs, but I know it's debris just caked with, I guess, jet fuel falling into this hole that we're in, this little void. And they start rolling closer and closer to me, and they start burning me. And I start yelling. I said, Sarge, I'm going to burn. I mean, one of the things that I've always feared is fire. And I couldn't move, so just imagine being stuck and these fireballs are coming toward you. As these fireballs kept coming in, they were near Dominic, and the heat from the fireballs were so intense that, you know, they set off his gun. And next thing you know, you hear pop, and as I look above me, I see sparks. It took me a second to look over, and that's when I realized Dominic's gun was going off. And You know, he had fired 1 round, leaving 15. So next thing you know, I have 15 rounds shooting over me. And the only thing I could do was cover my face and hope that if the bullet would hit my hand, it would stop it. But I knew better than that. I knew this situation was very, very severe. Really, at that point, I was exhausted emotionally, physically. We were crushed. I was burnt, shot at. I was really just ready to give up.
As I'm running towards the pile of rubble, the ash just engulfed me. And it felt so violating. The entire site looked like a war zone. There was black smoke everywhere. There was chaos everywhere. There was men and women laying throughout the street, and you can hear the cries in the city. It truly felt like a battlefield.
Jason made his way along this street, less than half a mile north of the pile. 3 firefighters walked towards him, and their brief meeting was caught on camera.
There's a lot of men and women that needed help. There's a lot of men and women that could not help themselves. And I remember approaching them and asking them, "Well, you okay? Are you okay? Sir, ma'am, are you okay?" Everyone was gray, had this gray plastered on debris all over them. And running down that gray face was tears or blood.
Still around, guys, still around.
And you know that there's a lot of loss of life. I remember running towards this one man that was laying on the pavement. I remember looking up at his face and seeing that he had this huge dent in his head. And I felt that he had been struck by debris. And I felt horrible at that time because there was nothing I could do.
Jason had thought he could save the man, but he was already dead.
I said a prayer for him, and I said to myself, I have to save more people. And for the next couple of hours, I tended to people that were injured. I helped set up triages. I even assisted firefighters in putting out fires. But what I wanted to do more than anything else was make it to that pile of rubble, because I felt that that's where all the people would be at that were injured and needed help. And that was my goal, my ultimate goal.
Rescue workers were already searching the pile, but there were no signs of survivors. Underground, Will Jimeno was getting desperate.
And I remember thinking to myself, you know, I'm going to make my peace with God. I said, God, thank you for, 32 great years of my life. Thank you for allowing me to live in a country that's free and do what I've always wanted to do, is become a police officer and help people. And I said, thank you for my wife, Allison. Thank you for my little girl, Bianca, that I've had and I've been able to enjoy for 4 years. The one thing I said, God, I'm going to miss so much is that I'm not going to be here for the birth of my little girl. That was the one thing that really, really hurt me the most that night. Even more than my pain was the fact that I wasn't going to be there to see my little girl be born. At that point, I closed my eyes and I wanted to die.
Will's wife was 7 months pregnant, and she knew that her husband was missing.
The worst part of that roller coaster day was the thought that I had to probably tell my 4-year-old that her father died. Absolute worst. Nothing worse than that. And then the thought, you know, that I was pregnant with Olivia, and then I would have to explain to my unborn child someday and teach her who her father was.
It was late afternoon when another tower, Tower 7, collapsed.
We heard that building fall, and it was the same sound as the first 2 buildings. Again, not knowing that the buildings fall, we just knew that the sound sounded the same as the first 2 big booms. And Sergeant McLaughlin said, they're not going to come in here. The area is unstable. It might not be till tomorrow morning. And that was very difficult, because I didn't know if we had it in us. Not so much in us, but would the body withstand the pressures that were being put upon us, and we didn't know.
John McLaughlin was right. Rescue workers had been pulled off the debris field because fire chiefs considered it too unstable. No professionals would now find Will and John. But this is footage of former Marine Jason Thomas, and he was about to enter the pile. But he hadn't told his wife what he was doing, and she only found out later where he was.
I was worried, hurt, and then a little bit angry, and I felt selfish for being angry, but I was angry at the fact that he had gone and he didn't need to. It wasn't his call to do it, as far as call of duty. And if he wasn't coming home, that meant that we would have been robbed of a father and a husband while he was going to save someone else. So losing his life voluntarily would be a huge loss for us as well. It sounds bad actually saying that, but that was a true human emotion. I was sad and worried and a little bit mad.
By early evening, Jason had met another ex-Marine, David Carnes. The official rescue had been called off, but they were convinced there would be survivors trapped in the debris field, so set off across the pile.
Every inch that we proceeded forward, it was so difficult. It was so difficult. Everything was hot to the touch. I remember looking down in some of the gaping holes and seeing fires still blazing and black smoke pouring up out of them. I remember the smells of September 11th. I remember the black smoke that carried the smell of death. The smell of burning flesh. And each inch that we would cross over, we would yell down into gaping holes. This is United States Marines. Is there anyone down there? Is there anyone down there? This United States Marines. And we would yell that out.
Meanwhile, Will Jimeno and John McLaughlin had been trapped underground for close to 9 hours.
I saw a figure walking toward me. White gown on, no face, brown hair. Over his left shoulder in the distance was a lake, peaceful with the trees behind it. Over his right shoulder was just a tall, endless sea of grass just waving peacefully. And as this person, who in my heart I knew was Jesus, came toward me, there was a peace that came over. I didn't feel any pain. There was just peacefulness. And I said, Sarge, we're going to get out of here, and if we're going to die, we're going to die trying. And there was a fire in my gut that just said, you know what, Will? You're going to keep trying, you're going to keep trying, and you're going to survive this.
I heard a voice calling out, and I remember turning around, and it appeared to be a firefighter. And I remember him telling me to come back. with a stern voice, I remember telling him, we're Marines. We don't go backwards, we go forward. And he said with a stern voice, good, because if you do decide to come back, we may wash you away because we are spraying down a building to the left and right of you. And I told him again with a stern voice that we're Marines and we don't have any intent on going backwards.
Throughout the entire night, all I could do was yell, PAPD, officers down, 813, PAPD, officers down, Jimeno and McLaughlin. You know, and it just kept going. It was like a bad nightmare. I had to keep Sergeant McLaughlin awake, and he did the same for me, because there were times that we were nodding off, and we knew it was important to keep conscious. We talked about our families, and that really was tough because, you know, again, we're police officers trying to do our job, we're trying to survive, but that human aspect, that's about what's at home.
The thought never crossed my mind of there being no one alive. But when we didn't get a voice at all for every bit of 2 hours, it was heartbreaking. So we continue to proceed forward. And there was this hole that was to the left of me. And coming out of this hole was black smoke just pouring out. And I could not see inside the hole at all. I remember yelling down into the hole, is there anyone down there? This is United States Marines. This is the United States Marines. Is there anyone down there?
And I thought for a second I had heard voices. And I really just paid attention. I yelled, and that's when I heard someone say, United States Marine Corps. Can anybody hear us?
The voice was so faint. And we yelled again. I remember yelling again into the hole.
And it was such an incredible feeling to hear those voices. Being buried down there, alive, pretty much knowing you're probably going to die, to hear United States Marine Corps, can anybody hear us? It was amazing.
Jason and David started to climb down into the hole.
I lost my footing, and I remember landing on my back. I fell about 10 to 12 feet, and it knocked the wind completely out of me. I remember laying there and looking over to the right of me, and there was this small fire. And then I remember looking to the left of me, and there was this huge piece of metal that was red hot. It was glowing in the dark. It was orange, and it blew my mind. And at that point in time, it just hit me like, this is a miracle that this person, this voice, is still alive. There's smoke still pouring up out of this hole. And I can't see my hands in front of me at this time. I don't know if there's gonna be a drop in the terrain at all. I'm on my hands and knees, and I'm feeling my way through. I remember as I was feeling my way through, I remember cutting my hand on something sharp, and I cut it pretty bad. And I continued to move forward. And because I had cut my hand, I couldn't really use it all that well, and I could feel the blood trickling down my sleeve.
They kept shining the light down, and I kept waving my left hand. And this went on for several minutes. It was getting very frustrating because they kept saying, we can't see you. Because of the concrete, we were caked in concrete. We looked like the concrete.
And I remember at this point in time digging, and I'm yelling, "Where are you at? Where are you at?" And he said, "I'm right here, my hand, look for my hand, look for my hand."
My mouth was like a beach. I mean, I had so much thirst. Somehow, some way, I had enough to get enough spit to just lick my hand literally like this and have a little circle that cleared up the concrete, and I waved my hand again, and that's when they said, "We got you."
Will had been found, but how could he and John be rescued from the rubble?
Once they realized that they saw me, I said to them, I said, you know, "Who are you guys?" And they said, "Sergeant Thomas and Staff Sergeant Carnes." And I said, "Well, it's Officer Jimeno and Sergeant McLaughlin, Port Authority Police. We've been buried for a long time. We've lost teammates." And they said, "Don't worry, buddy."
I remember telling them, "We're Marines. We're Marines. We're not going to leave you behind, buddy. We can get you out."
Realizing they couldn't do it alone, Jason and David climbed back to the surface to raise the alarm.
I remember waving my flashlight in the direction where I felt there would be rescuers, and I waved it back and forth. I actually held it over top of my head, and I went back and forth and up and down, and I remember yelling out, yelling out to whomever was out there.
After seeing flashlights waving back in the distance, Jason and David returned to Will.
Just having that light down there and hearing his voice gave me such confidence. And, you know, we talked a little bit.
Will Jimeno started sharing that his wife was pregnant and he was expecting a newborn girl. And that made me commit to the fight that much more.
Meanwhile, a small team of rescuers arrived. They'd seen Jason's flashlight and ignored instructions to keep off the pile to join in the rescue.
When they got down there, I literally just wanted to give myself to them. I was just so exhausted. I remember starting to hyperventilate. I remember Jason yelling down still, "Hold on, hold on." Scott Strauss was saying, "Listen, you got to focus."
He's laying on his back, and the only thing we can see of him is his head. His right arm is free and part of his right side. Everything else is encased in rubble. He looks like he was poured out of a dump truck. And we crawled in, hands first, laying down on our sides, and we literally clawed away at Will to try to get some of this debris out of the way.
You won't need that much. Don't paint that hole, because that's where we're headed. Yeah, thanks.
I remember seeing this huge Marine, and I was really kind of shocked at how large a man he was. And he says, "What are we going to do?" I said, "We've got to start clearing out the debris and the pipes and the conduit and the rubble to make a pathway."
I remember picking up huge boulders and moving them out of the way. I remember clearing rebar and just debris out of the way.
And we were very fortunate there was an elevator shaft right there, and there was a broken elevator door. And because he was in such good shape, had no problem taking these large cinder blocks and throwing them right down the elevator shaft and, helping do what needed to be done to get Will out of there. Once we showed up, he could have climbed out of that hole, because I wanted to get out of there. He could have left and gone home, said, "I did a job, I helped out." He stayed there through the whole operation.
Please lay down and keep still.
Will Jimeno, at that point in time, pointed out that he hadn't heard from his sergeant, John McLaughlin.
Hold up, guys.
And during the rescue operation of Will, Sergeant McLaughlin would fade in and out of consciousness. And when he would fade out of consciousness, we thought he had passed away. And Will is trying to keep John's spirits up by talking to him. And he's like, "Sarge, you there? Sarge, you there?" And you can hear him fading out, and he would fade out. And he's like, "Don't die on me now, Sarge. They almost had me out. They almost had me out. Don't you die on me now."
And I was trapped so severely that they couldn't get my left leg out. And that's when I said to Scott, just cut my left leg off.
And this whole time, he's saying, cut my leg off. Get me out of here, because you got to get to the sergeant, because he's going to die if you do not get him out of here. Just cut my leg off. I said, well, I'm not going to cut your leg off. I have nothing to cut your leg off with.
It was around 11 p.m. when Will was finally freed.
So here we are after almost 3 hours toiling in this heat, smoke, and I'm exhausted. I'm sure Scotty's exhausted, and we got to lift Will up. You know, we're struggling a little bit because he's a big man, and all of a sudden Jason stepped up, pitched in, and he's such a big guy. He's, you know, monster of a man. He's able to provide that extra strength to get Will up through the hole.
And as we got to the top of the hole, I remember seeing Will, and I remember reaching out and grabbing his arm, his left arm, and telling him, buddy, you're out. We got you.
Will was rushed to hospital, while his exhausted rescuers swapped places with a new team. But the night wasn't over for Jason Thomas.
And at that time, I felt relieved. But I also felt that the job was not completed at all, because we had another person that was still trapped. And I remember making my way back into the hole and digging to get to John.
It was dawn on the 12th of September when a cameraman captured the moment that John McLaughlin was finally pulled alive from the rubble, bringing to an end the most incredible rescue of 9/11. John was kept in an induced coma for 6 weeks, but survived. Today he's back with his family and doesn't like to talk about his traumatic experience. Nearly 24 hours after he'd left his house with his baby daughter, Jason Thomas returned home. His wife, Kirsty, had no idea what an ordeal he'd been through.
It looked like he had seen death or seen a ghost. It was amazing in a very heart-wrenching way. So I cried, and he didn't cry, but he teared up. And he didn't cry to me anyway. I think he cried to himself, but it was just a very heartening experience. And I hugged him anyway. I embraced him. I didn't want to let him go.
Every day for the next 3 weeks, Jason returned to Ground Zero, tirelessly searching the rubble, desperate to find more survivors. He recovered body parts, but no one else was found alive. Traumatized by the things he'd seen, Jason never told anyone about the difference he'd made.
He didn't want to talk about it. If I asked him, he didn't want to talk about it. So I just stopped asking. I could tell it hurt him. So I didn't want to open up that can of worms and have him relive that.
I felt as if, okay, it's time for me to be a husband and a dad. Now, let's take all of what was experienced and let's push it to the side.
Will Jimeno spent over 2 months in hospital. As he was released, his wife was admitted.
You gonna take that chair, I guess?
Yep.
Yeah.
This was the moment he thought he'd never live to see.
He was out just in time for Olivia's birth, which was the best present ever. You know, birth of my second daughter and Will by my side. So it was amazing. It was very, very emotional, very emotional.
So new addition to the Jimeno family, right, Bianca? New baby sister. Why don't you give your sister a kiss? You want a hug? Give her a small hug and a kiss.
To see life
after I've seen so much death was a true blessing. Not only because it's my child, it was just hope. Hope for the future that, you know, that good things were to come.
During his recovery, Will was reunited with his rescuers. But there was one person missing, and nobody knew where he was.
Unfortunately, we never did find Jason Thomas. We even had some of our Port Authority police detectives trying to find this mysterious Marine. And for several years, I got to tell you, it was always on my mind. You know, I just wanted to say thank you to him. I wanted to give him a hug.
In an attempt to put the past behind him, Jason had moved his family to Ohio, but the events of 9/11 were never far from his mind.
He kept it bottled up for so long, and that built up, and it made for a harder exterior. Instead of just expressing himself, he wouldn't do that, and so that made him kind of callous around the edges and sad.
That might have been the end of Jason's story. But 5 years later, everything changed.
We're prepared for everything. But not this.
I got it, Sarge.
Oliver Stone's feature film World Trade Center turned the rescue of Will Jimeno into an uplifting, action-packed Hollywood movie. Nicolas Cage played John McLaughlin.
Found in the middle of the rubble, still alive.
The first Jason knew about it was when he saw this trailer on television.
You are our mission.
World Trade Center.
That's when the chills hit me. Because at that point in time, I knew that they were telling my story.
I didn't know it was his story until he said, "That's what I did." He said, that's it.
I'll recon the area, Sergeant. Our best shot is going up.
The director spent a fortune recreating Ground Zero and carefully reenacting what happened to Will. But as Jason had disappeared after the rescue, much of his story was missing. And incredibly, the actor playing Jason was white.
Thomas.
Carnes.
Some of Jason's family saw this as a fundamental mistake.
I felt that it was relevant and that it was absolutely necessary for people to see Jason as an African-American male, as a positive role model, a historical figure now.
The only thing that bothered Jason, though, was that the actor wasn't wearing a Marine Corps cap as he had been. Nevertheless, Teresa contacted Oliver Stone, and the director wrote to Jason, apologizing for what had been a genuine error.
Jason Thomas was a 9/11 hero. African-American 9/11 hero.
In the weeks that followed, Jason finally began to tell his family what he'd done.
Telling my story was therapeutic because I didn't know personally how much it was affecting my life, emotionally affecting my marriage, emotionally affecting my kids. It was something I thought I had tucked away and without any problems, and it actually was causing a major problem.
Then, 5 years after their first meeting under the rubble pile, Jason and Will were finally reunited. Today they're still friends who share a unique bond.
Hey!
What's up, Jason,
How's it
man?
going? Good to see you.
It's good to see you, man.
How you been? I'm doing well. How you doing, brother?
It's been a while, but I'm doing good now that you're here, man. And why don't you come inside?
Hey, thanks. Really good to see you.
You know, every time I see Jason, it puts a smile on my face. And seeing him today, it just made me feel happy, you know.
Hey, guys. We got Jason here. Hey, how's it going?
How are you? Oh, so good to see you.
Well. Man, you are beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
I always talk about faith, hope, and love, and I see that in Jason because I know man did on 9/11. He put his life on the line so others can come home. And I'm lucky that I'm one of those that came home because of Jason Thomas.
Hey! How you doing?
And for Jason, there will always be a special place in his heart for Olivia.
And I love her. She's like my own daughter.
Thank you, Jason, for saving my daddy, for finding him in the other rescue workers.
Oh, baby. So sweet. And I'm just glad I was a part of all of that.